The day had arrived, and the grand mansion was filled with an air of sadness that weighed heavily on everyone inside. People dressed in black gathered slowly, some holding hands for comfort, while others whispered quietly to each other, trying to process the loss of a woman who had been admired, loved, and respected by many. The millionaire's wife had always been the center of attention in high society, known for her elegance, charm, and generosity, and now, the world seemed a little dimmer. Without her, the large hall where the funeral was taking place was decorated with white flowers, their fragrance mixing with the soft smell of polished wood and the faint aroma of incense. The chandeliers above reflected the dim sunlight filtering through tall windows, casting a gentle glow on the gathered crowd. Mourners arrived in luxurious cars, stepping onto the marble floors with quiet reverence. Some brought bouquets of roses, lilies, or orchids, each one placed carefully near the casket, while others simply stood silently, their eyes red from crying. The atmosphere was heavy, yet controlled, a mix of grief, respect, and the kind of tension that comes when people are unsure how to express deep sorrow in front of so many. The millionaire himself stood near the front, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his face a mask of composure, though those who looked closely could see the tight lines of stress around his eyes and the faint trembling of his hands. He nodded politely to guests as they offered condolences, but inside, he was a whirlwind of emotion, thinking about the memories, the laughter, and the moments that could never be relived. The family sat together on one side, their heads bowed in quiet mourning. Some held each other's hands tightly, while others stared at the floor, lost in thought. Memories of the woman they had lost seemed to hang in the air, almost tangible, like the soft music that played in the background. The gentle notes of a piano filled the room, adding a layer of solemnity to the scene, while the occasional sniffle or soft sob reminded everyone of the deep human sadness that comes with losing someone so close. The servants moved quietly, ensuring that everything was in place, the flowers arranged perfectly, the casket polished and adorned with delicate arrangements. Everything had to be perfect, reflecting not only the status of the family but also the respect they wanted to show for the departed. Outside, the sun was shining gently, but the warmth did little to lighten the mood. The sky was clear, yet there was a strange stillness in the air, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The driveway was lined with cars from distant cities, friends, and acquaintances who had come to pay their respects. Some of them were people the millionaire knew only by reputation, others were old family friends, and a few were complete strangers drawn by curiosity or the desire to witness the event. The grandeur of the location, the scale of the gathering, and the visible grief all combined to create a scene that was almost cinematic in its impact. As the service began, the crowd grew quiet, the only sounds being the occasional shuffle of feet, a soft cough, or the rustle of clothing. The priest's voice began to speak of life, love, and the fleeting nature of existence, each word carrying weight, yet none of them could fully capture the emptiness that those present felt. People looked at the casket, imagining the life that had been, the dreams that had been shared, and the future that would never come. Even in their sadness, many tried to remember the good times, the laughter, and the moments of kindness, clinging to memories as if they could shield them from the harsh reality of loss. Amid all this, there was a subtle tension that lingered, a sense that something unexpected might happen, though no one could have predicted what. The atmosphere was filled with a mix of curiosity and unease, as guests glanced at each other, wondering if everyone present truly belonged, or if someone might disrupt the carefully maintained order of the gathering. Yet for the moment, the world seemed to move slowly, each second stretching out, every glance and gesture magnified in significance. The room was a delicate balance of grief and decorum, a stage set for emotions that were deeply human and yet restrained by the social expectations of wealth and status. Even the small details added to the mood, the soft hum of air conditioning, the subtle creaking of the wooden floorboards, and the gentle flutter of curtains as a light breeze drifted through the open windows. It was a perfect setting for reflection, for sadness, for memories, and perhaps, for something completely unforeseen that could change the entire course of the day. In that moment, no one realized that the quiet, controlled atmosphere was about to be shattered, that the careful balance of sorrow, respect, and social etiquette would soon give way to shock, surprise, and revelation. The stage was set, the audience ready, and the story was about to take a turn that nobody would forget. The quiet murmur of the funeral was suddenly interrupted by a small ripple of curiosity, a movement at the entrance that no one had noticed before. At first, it was easy to dismiss, a shadow in the doorway, just someone arriving late. But as the figure grew closer, heads began to turn, eyes widening in disbelief. A young girl, no older than 16, stepped carefully onto the polished marble floor. Her clothes were simple, almost plain compared to the elegant black dresses and tailored suits of the other guests, yet there was something about her presence that made it impossible to look away. Whispers began to spread through the crowd, soft at first, then growing louder. Who is she? I don't recognize her, why is she here? The murmurs traveled like wildfire, making their way to the ears of the millionaire and his family, who stiffened as they followed the movement of the unexpected visitor. The girl walked with a quiet confidence, her head held high, her steps deliberate and measured. It was as if she had rehearsed this moment for days, or perhaps had been waiting for the perfect time to appear. The security staff at the entrance exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene. They had been trained for disruptions, for troublemakers, but this girl did not look like a threat, and yet, their instincts told them something was off. They hesitated, watching as she moved closer to the center of the room, each step drawing the eyes of dozens of high-profile guests. Some of the mourners leaned forward in curiosity, trying to see her face clearly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that decorum was about to be challenged. The millionaire himself finally took notice, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the girl. He could not place her immediately, which only made the tension rise. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Did she know the deceased? Was she a friend, a distant relative, or someone with a message he had never anticipated? The uncertainty made the room feel heavier, the air thick with suspense. Every whispered speculation seemed louder than the soft music that still played in the background. As she walked further, her calmness contrasted sharply with the growing chaos around her. The young girl did not stumble or hesitate, despite the curious stares and subtle glares directed at her. People tried to block her path subtly, moving slightly to the side, but she adjusted without hesitation, gliding past them as though she belonged there. Her eyes were steady, scanning the room, and when she finally approached the front, the crowd fell into an almost imperceptible silence, a collective pause, as if everyone knew that something remarkable was about to happen. Even the flowers and the polished wood of the hall seemed to fade into the background as the girl stepped closer to the casket. Her presence alone commanded attention, and the whispers died down into a tense, expectant quiet. For the first time that day, the millionaire's wife's funeral felt less like a controlled display of grief and more like a stage awaiting a revelation. Some of the guests shifted nervously in their seats, unsure whether to speak, move, or simply watch. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes hearts beat faster and palms sweat. The girl finally stopped just a few feet from the casket, her small frame standing in stark contrast to the grandeur of the hall, yet there was an undeniable strength in her posture, a sense of purpose that made even the most confident attendees pause. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, glancing down briefly before lifting her head. Her eyes met those of the millionaire, and in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Though the nature of it was still a mystery, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next words, the next action that would change everything. No one could have predicted the impact of her arrival, not the family, not the guests, not even the security staff, yet in that instant, the stage was set for the moment that would be talked about for weeks, perhaps months. The young girl had arrived, seemingly out of nowhere, her purpose unknown, her message a secret, and the anticipation in the room was electric. The funeral, meant to be solemn and controlled, had transformed into a story about to unfold, a drama that no one present would ever forget. The room had fallen into a silence so thick it felt almost tangible. The murmurs had stopped, the soft piano music faded into the background, and every eye was now fixed on the young girl standing just a few feet from the casket. Yet the tension was not just about her presence, it was about the anticipation of what she might do next. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, some leaning forward, others clutching tissues nervously. All the controlled grief of the funeral now teetered on the edge of chaos, because no one could predict what would happen. Some whispered guesses rippled through the crowd. Maybe she's a relative, one woman said softly. No, I don't think so, murmured another. She doesn't look familiar at all. but every explanation seemed inadequate, and the uncertainty only fueled the tension. The millionaire himself remained frozen for a moment, his eyes locked on the girl, his heart beat faster, a mix of fear, curiosity, and anger rising within him. He had thought he knew everyone who might have something to say today, but this girl was an unknown variable, a disruption to everything he had carefully planned for the funeral. The family exchanged uneasy glances, some whispered hurriedly to each other, trying to figure out who she was, others simply stared, holding their breath, their grief now mingled with anxiety, as though the girl's presence threatened to unravel not just the ceremony but the very image they had cultivated for the world. The staff and security personnel were frozen, unsure if they should step in. The girl's calm composure made them hesitate. She wasn't threatening, but she wasn't following the unspoken rules of etiquette either, and that made everyone around her uneasy. As she took a slow step forward, the sound of her shoe against the marble echoed unnaturally in the vast hall. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and yet carried an invisible weight, like a signal that something important was about to be revealed. People began to lean closer in their seats, curiosity now outweighing their grief. The young girl paused briefly, her gaze sweeping across the room, and in that moment, she seemed to measure every reaction, every emotion, like she knew the effect she was about to have. Some guests shifted nervously, their discomfort palpable, while others couldn't take their eyes off her. Intrigued by the audacity of this unexpected visitor, the tension grew almost unbearable, a thick coil tightening around everyone in the room. Even the chandeliers above seemed to flicker in the sudden heaviness, casting shadows across the mourners' faces. The millionaire's jaw tightened, his mind racing with questions he didn't want to answer aloud. Who was she? What did she want? And more importantly, what could she possibly declare that would matter so much on this day? A few brave guests tried to break the silence, whispering guesses to one another, but their words felt fragile, easily swallowed by the anticipation that filled the room. No one dared speak too loudly, no one dared move too quickly, as if one wrong gesture might set the situation spiraling out of control. The girl's presence had become the center of gravity, pulling every thought, every heartbeat toward her, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. And then, almost imperceptibly, the young girl's eyes focused on the casket, and a small, confident smile appeared on her lips, subtle but unmistakable, the tiniest hint of emotion, yet it carried a message, a warning perhaps, or a promise of revelation. The mourners felt it immediately, though they could not understand it. Some shifted in their seats, uneasy at the energy she projected, while others leaned forward, captivated by the silent drama unfolding before them. The air was electric, alive with the anticipation of words yet to be spoken. In that moment, the room transformed, no longer just a place of controlled mourning, it had become a stage, the audience tense, waiting, some fearful, some intrigued, all senses heightened, every detail amplified, from the soft hum of the air conditioning to the faint rustle of the curtains. Everything seemed to hold its breath, as if the girl herself had stopped time. The tension was now so thick that it was almost impossible to think about anything else, and everyone in the hall knew instinctively that this funeral would never be the same again. The silence in the hall was so heavy it felt like it might crush anyone who dared speak. Every eye was fixed on the young girl now standing mere feet from the casket. The soft piano music had stopped completely, leaving only the quiet rustle of the mourners and the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every guest could feel that something extraordinary was about to happen, yet no one knew what. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if it were holding its breath in sympathy with the crowd. The girl took a slow, deliberate step forward, her small frame cutting through the vast room like a spark through dry tinder. Her hands, once hidden calmly at her sides, now gripped the folded piece of paper she had pulled from her pocket. The paper trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what it contained. She glanced up at the crowd, her dark eyes steady, unwavering, and for the first time, some of the guests realized that she was not just here to observe, she had come to declare something, something that would shatter the carefully controlled world of the funeral. Murmurs began to spread again, quieter this time, filled with disbelief rather than curiosity. Who is she? Why is she here? What is she about to say? The millionaire's jaw tightened as he watched her, his hands clenched into fists. Though he tried to remain composed, He had prepared for grief, for sorrow, for the occasional tearful speech, but nothing in his careful planning had accounted for this, for the presence of a young girl who had the courage, or audacity, to step into the heart of his meticulously organized world and demand attention. The family shifted uneasily, some whispering nervously to each other, others simply sat frozen, their eyes wide with shock, their grief now mixed with anxiety, as though the girl's quiet defiance threatened to unravel the entire event. The staff remained silent, unsure whether to intervene, but her confidence made them hesitate. She didn't rush or stumble, didn't falter, her every step was purposeful, measured, and controlled, and it made the room's tension almost unbearable. The guests could feel it coil around them, tightening with every heartbeat, every second stretching longer than the last. Finally, the girl reached the podium at the front, the polished wood gleaming under the soft sunlight filtering through the windows. She paused, letting her presence settle fully in the room. The mourners leaned forward, a collective intake of breath rippling through the crowd. It was as if the world had stopped, waiting for her to speak, and the weight of expectation was almost unbearable. Then she spoke, and her voice rang clear, cutting through the silence like a bell in a fog. Every word was deliberate, carefully chosen, and full of meaning. It was not loud, but it carried authority, a quiet power that demanded attention. The room went completely still, as though the very walls were listening. The millionaire's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, the family members' faces registering shock, disbelief, and even fear. All at once, the funeral was no longer just a ceremony of mourning, it had become a stage for revelation, confrontation, and truth. Every guest in the hall felt it, the sudden shift in energy, the tension that went beyond grief into something far more potent. It was not just what she said, but the audacity of saying it at this moment, the sheer courage it took to interrupt a carefully orchestrated event. The whispers that had started at the entrance died completely, replaced by an electrifying anticipation. The air vibrated with a mix of fear, excitement, and curiosity, each person wondering how far this young girl would go, what secrets she might expose, and what impact her words would have. The young girl's presence alone had transformed the atmosphere, from solemn grief to charged suspense, and now, with her voice breaking the silence, the world inside the funeral hall had changed forever. The tension was thick, palpable, almost as if the room itself were leaning in, waiting for the next words, the revelation, the shock that everyone knew was coming. For the first time that day, every person present felt that the funeral was no longer predictable, no longer safe, but alive with the promise of something unforgettable, something that would be remembered long after the day was over. The young girl took a slow, steady breath, her small hands gripping the folded paper tightly. She raised her head, and her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of every guest, every mourner, and finally, the millionaire himself. The air seemed to thrum with tension, a quiet hum that vibrated in everyone's chest, as if the room itself was waiting for the words that would shatter the fragile calm. Then, in a voice that was calm but unyielding, she began to speak. Each word was deliberate, each syllable carrying weight, as though it had been honed over weeks, months, or even years. At first, her declaration seemed simple, almost innocuous, but slowly, the meaning began to sink in, and the room collectively froze. The millionaire's eyes widened in disbelief, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He leaned forward slightly, struggling to comprehend what was being revealed, his perfectly composed exterior faltering for the first time since the service began. The family's whispers turned into gasps, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and confusion. Some clutched each other's hands, while others buried their faces in tissues, unable to look, yet unable to turn away. The girl's words were not just shocking, they were a revelation, something that exposed truths no one had dared speak aloud, secrets that had been buried, carefully hidden behind wealth, power, and polite society. Now they were out in the open, raw and undeniable. Every guest felt the weight of her declaration, as if a curtain had been lifted and they were seeing the entire story for the first time. The millionaire's face drained of color, his mind racing to process the truth, to reconcile what he had believed with what was now unfolding before him. Some guests murmured nervously to one another, trying to make sense of it. Did she really say that? I can't believe it, this changes everything. But the girl did not pause, did not falter. She continued, her voice unwavering. each word landing like a small hammer striking the room. The intensity of her delivery made the tension almost unbearable, and yet it was mesmerizing, a magnet pulling every eye and every thought toward her. The declaration went beyond personal scandal. It touched everyone present in unexpected ways, exposing betrayals, hidden relationships, and truths that had been carefully masked by wealth and appearances. For a moment, the world outside the funeral seemed to disappear, leaving only the room, the girl, and the silent, stunned crowd. Even the soft scent of the flowers and the polished wood of the hall could not compete with the electricity in the air. Each person felt it differently: shock, anger, disbelief, even admiration, but no one could ignore it. The millionaire's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the podium for support, his perfectly measured composure completely shattered. He opened his mouth, perhaps to respond, to deny, to justify, but the words caught in his throat. His family shifted nervously, some stepping back in horror, others leaned forward, unable to resist the pull of the moment. The young girl's presence, small and seemingly fragile, had become an unstoppable force, shaking the very foundation of a carefully controlled world. And then, with a final, calm statement, she delivered the last, undeniable blow, words that would linger in everyone's mind long after the funeral ended. Some guests gasped audibly, while others simply sat frozen, staring in disbelief. The tension in the room was complete, total, leaving no room for doubt. Her declaration had changed everything, redefined the event, the people, and the lives connected to it. For the first time that day, the funeral was no longer just a ceremony of mourning. It had become a stage for truth, for courage, for revelation. The young girl, once a quiet and unexpected presence, now stood as the center of attention, commanding the respect, fear, and awe of everyone present. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of her words lingering like thunder after a storm, and everyone knew, instinctively, that nothing would ever be the same again. The room remained frozen for a moment, as if everyone had been physically stunned by the young girl's words. Then, slowly, reality began to sink in, and reactions erupted in a mix of gasps, whispers, and stunned silence. Some guests clutched their pearls, others pressed hands over their mouths, unable to believe what they had just heard. The carefully controlled atmosphere of the funeral had shattered, replaced by a tense, electric energy that filled every corner of the hall. The millionaire himself was the first to react, though it was not a calm, measured response. His face drained of color, jaw tight, and eyes wide with disbelief. He stumbled slightly as he stepped back, gripping the podium as if it could anchor him against the shock. For years, he had controlled every situation, every image, every secret, but nothing could have prepared him for this. A young girl, barely noticeable until now, had spoken truths that cut through the layers of wealth, status, and carefully curated appearances, leaving him exposed in front of friends, family, and strangers alike. The family's reactions were immediate and chaotic. Each member processed the words differently. Some froze in stunned silence, others whispered urgently to one another, some turned pale, others shook with anger. The maid who had been quietly standing by the flowers gasped audibly, while a few guests fumbled for their phones, their instincts telling them this was a moment that could not be ignored. Videos would go viral, stories would spread, and social media would explode, all before the funeral was even over. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the crowd, growing louder by the second. Did she really say that? I can't believe this is happening. This changes everything. The young girl, standing firm, did not flinch or falter under the scrutiny. Her presence alone had transformed her from an outsider to the undeniable center of attention. The tension was no longer just about her declaration, but about the shockwave it created, how the words would ripple through the lives of everyone in the room, and beyond. Some guests began to murmur among themselves, speculating on the implications, their curiosity mixed with fear, excitement, and disbelief. The wealthy friends of the family exchanged glances, worried about reputation, about the ripple effects on their own lives. Meanwhile, others were drawn to the drama, unable to look away, captivated by the raw honesty and audacity of the girl's actions. It was as if the funeral itself had become a stage for something larger than grief, something unpredictable and unforgettable. Even the millionaire's closest associates seemed shaken, their expressions a mixture of panic and confusion. They whispered hurriedly, glancing at one another, trying to figure out how to respond, but no plan could counter the shock. The young girl's calm, measured demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her, making her words land even heavier. The irony was not lost on anyone. A girl, so young and unassuming, had taken control of a room full of adults who had considered themselves untouchable. The emotional intensity escalated as the family tried to regain composure, but every attempt seemed futile. The millionaire's wife's friends gasped audibly, some discreetly wiping tears from their eyes, while others stared at the girl in awe or fear. The power of her words had transcended the room. It was no longer just a funeral, it was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered long after the mourners left. Every whispered conversation, every look exchanged, carried the weight of what had just been revealed. The girl's courage and honesty left a mark on everyone, even those who tried to dismiss her. And then, as the room slowly absorbed the reality of her declaration, a profound silence settled over the hall, a momentary calm amid the storm. Eyes lingered on her, some with admiration, some with suspicion, but all with the undeniable awareness that nothing would ever be the same. The young girl, once unnoticed, now held the room in a grip of awe and shock, and the echoes of her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and inescapable, leaving every person in that hall forever changed. The funeral had ended, but the echoes of the young girl's words lingered far beyond the polished doors of the grand mansion. As mourners left, their conversations were dominated not by grief alone, but by the unexpected revelation that had appended the solemn ceremony. Whispers turned into hushed debates, questions replaced the usual condolences, and every gesture, glance, or comment carried the weight of what had just been exposed. The shockwave of her declaration had not stayed contained. Within the hall, it had already begun to spread, like ripples across water, reaching people who had no idea who she was or why she had dared to speak. Social media ignited almost instantly. Guests who had discreetly filmed parts of the event uploaded clips, and within hours, the video had gone viral. Trending hashtags appeared, debates erupted in comment sections, and strangers speculated endlessly about the mysterious girl who had interrupted the funeral. Many were captivated by her courage, some admired her honesty, while others criticized her audacity. The story spread like wildfire, gaining attention not just locally but across cities, countries, and eventually, news outlets picked it up, turning the incident into a public spectacle. Back at the mansion, the millionaire was struggling to regain composure. His private world, once tightly controlled and meticulously managed, now lay exposed for everyone to see. Colleagues, friends, and business partners called, texted, and emailed, all probing for answers, trying to understand how one moment could have exposed so much. His reputation, carefully built over decades, suddenly felt fragile, threatened by a young girl who had dared to speak the truth. The family, too, was reeling. Their carefully maintained image of dignity and control had been shaken, and they could feel the gossip, judgment, and curiosity pressing down on them from every side. Even among close friends of the deceased, the reactions were divided. Some expressed admiration for the girl's bravery, acknowledging that she had revealed something important, while others whispered that it was inappropriate, disrespectful, even scandalous. The duality of shock and respect created tension in every conversation, leaving people unsure how to respond publicly. Yet everyone agreed on one thing: the funeral would never be forgotten, and the girl's declaration had left an indelible mark on all present. Meanwhile, the young girl herself became a mystery that everyone wanted to solve. No one seemed to know her background, her connection to the millionaire's wife, or how she had gained the courage to speak so boldly. Rumors swirled wildly. Some claimed she was a long-lost relative, others insisted she had uncovered hidden family secrets, and a few suggested she had personal motives unknown to anyone. Each new version of the story grew more dramatic than the last, fueling curiosity and keeping the incident alive in the minds of those who had not even attended the funeral. Friends of the millionaire's family were equally divided. Some offered private support, trying to smooth over the embarrassment caused by the public revelation. Others avoided contact entirely, wary of being drawn into the scandal. Even casual acquaintances who had attended for social appearances found themselves haunted by the girl's words, their initial sympathy and grief now tinged with a mix of awe, unease, and anxiety about the consequences of the revelation. In the days that followed, invitations to social events were questioned, casual meetings were avoided, and news of the girl's boldness dominated conversations everywhere. The funeral, meant to honor a life, had become the center of a story about truth, courage, and the unpredictability of human action. even strangers who had watched the viral clips felt invested, discussing, speculating, and forming opinions about the girl, the millionaire, and the family. The world seemed to have shifted slightly in those few minutes, proving how a single voice, no matter how young or seemingly powerless, could create waves that reached far beyond its origin. And yet, amid all the gossip, speculation, and social chaos, one truth remained clear: the young girl's courage had altered the narrative, forcing everyone to confront secrets and realities that had long been hidden. The millionaire, his family, the friends, and even the public now had to live with the aftermath of her declaration, navigating a world that was suddenly more complicated, more truthful, and far more unpredictable than it had been before. The impact of her words was permanent, a story that would be retold, remembered, and analyzed for years to come. The days following the funeral felt surreal, as if the world itself had shifted slightly on its axis. The young girl's words had traveled far beyond the walls of the mansion, beyond the guests who had witnessed them firsthand. They had reached strangers, distant acquaintances, and even complete outsiders who had heard about the shocking interruption through social media, news outlets, and word of mouth. What had started as a private, solemn ceremony had become a story shared, debated, and remembered by thousands, a story that would not fade with time. The millionaire tried to return to his life, to the business meetings, social appearances, and carefully curated public image that had once defined him, but nothing felt the same. The weight of the girl's revelation lingered in every conversation, every glance, every unexpected moment of silence. He could no longer control what people thought of him, nor could he erase the truth that had been laid bare in front of dozens of witnesses. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her small figure, standing confidently by the podium, her voice clear and unwavering, and he realized that no amount of wealth or status could shield him from the consequences of that day. The family, too, struggled with the aftermath, their grief now intertwined with tension, embarrassment, and reflection. Some felt anger toward the girl, believing she had violated the solemnity of the occasion. Others felt awe, even gratitude, for her bravery in speaking truths that had long been ignored or hidden. They began to see that the funeral, once merely an event of mourning, had become a turning point, a moment of reckoning that forced them to confront realities they could no longer avoid. Meanwhile, the young girl became something of a legend in her community, admired for her courage and her unwavering determination to speak the truth. People whispered about her in awe, sharing stories of her bravery with anyone who would listen. Her name became associated with honesty, fearlessness, and the power of a single voice to change even the most controlled environments. Friends and strangers alike speculated about her motivations, her life, and her character, but no one could deny the effect she had had. The girl had shown that age, size, or social status could never limit the impact of courage, and her legacy was already beginning to take shape. Even the media continued to follow the story, highlighting the social and emotional consequences of her actions. Commentators debated the ethical implications, the emotional impact on the family, and the societal lessons about honesty, power, and human courage. The story sparked conversations far beyond the mansion, prompting strangers to consider what they might do if faced with a similar moment of truth. It was no longer just a funeral, it had become a symbol, a narrative about bravery and the human capacity to confront difficult realities. And in quiet moments, the millionaire himself began to reflect, grudgingly at first, and then with a deeper understanding. The girl's words had forced him to confront not only what others knew about him, but what he knew about himself. He realized that truth, once spoken, could not be undone, but it could lead to growth, humility, and even redemption. The same applied to his family, who began to question old habits, old decisions, and old secrets that had long been left unspoken. Ultimately, the story of that funeral became more than an event. It became a lesson, a testament to the power of courage, honesty, and timing. The girl's act of speaking out had changed the lives of everyone in that room, leaving an imprint that could never be erased. Her legacy was not just the shock she caused, but the reflection she inspired, prompting everyone, from the millionaire to the strangers who heard about her, to reconsider their actions, their secrets, and their responsibilities to the truth. And so, the young girl's story lived on, a reminder that even the smallest voice could make the loudest impact. that one brave act could ripple across lives, altering the course of events and the hearts of those involved. Her interruption, once seen as shocking, would eventually be remembered as courageous, a turning point, a moment of truth that proved the power of honesty, the unpredictability of life, and the lasting legacy of one person's courage in the face of expectation.